What's that you say? You may use layer masks but not quite fully understand the concept behind layer masks? Well, no problem, then this video training module is just for you. Believe it or not, the basics of layer masks are actually incredibly simple but very powerful. In this lesson, you will learn the basic concepts of layer masks, but not the advanced stuff. That comes later. Keep in mind, this lesson is not about listening or about watching how layer masks work. It's about doing. You must actually do what I do to help you fully understand the concept of layer masks. But first, a tiny intro. So what happens when someone wears a mask? Kind of a dumb question, huh? Well, take these lovely ladies for instance. Everywhere that their mask happens to fall on their face, well, that area of each one of their faces is no longer visible. But everywhere where the masks aren't hiding their faces, well, that area of each of their faces is visible. That's basically how layer masks work, except that you get to selectively choose where the mask is and how opaque it is. Pretty simple, huh? So let's follow a quick lesson. If you're following along with me, today I have opened the image layermasking101.psd. And what we want to do is go up to Window, Workspace, Default Workspace. And now what we want to do is actually click the X that's inside of the Navigator tab right here. Because the Navigator tab is going to be a little bit distracting when we go to actually see what's going on while we apply layer masks. Well, layer masks are a great way to selectively cut away some part of a layer to reveal the layer below it. And sometimes the layer that is being cut could be an image, a color, a gradient, or even a transparency itself. And sometimes the layer below could be an image, a color, multiple colors such as a gradient, or even a transparency. Layer masks are also a great way to blend two layers together, as well as a great way to non-destructively erase parts of a layer. So let's say you have a piece of blue paper and also a piece of thin, flexible plastic with no holes or cuts in it. So let's say your goal was to eventually have a blue piece of paper with holes in the form of shapes cut out of it. So to make precise cuts with your X-Acto knife on that piece of blue paper, you bought this piece of plastic to act as a stencil. To make your stencil, you would cut out the various shapes from the flexible plastic. So the stencil in this scenario is the layer mask itself. So think of layer masks as a stencil, where the black part of the mask is the part of the stencil that is cut out, and the white part of the mask is the plastic part of the stencil itself that does the protecting when you do your cutting with your X-Acto knife. When you're done creating your stencil, which is, well, your mask, you place your stencil on top of the layer of blue paper and use your X-Acto knife to cut away. Think of the act of laying the stencil on top of the blue piece of paper as the same thing as linking a layer to a layer mask. So now let's say you have two pieces of paper. The blue paper that you have made your cuts to using your stencil, and a yellow piece of paper underneath that you have not made any cuts to. So in your layers panel, the blue layer will have a mask or stencil used on it, where the black part of the stencil is an indication of where you've done your cutting, and the white part of the stencil is again that plastic part of the stencil, which is the indication of where you couldn't cut. And the layer under this blue layer is filled with yellow. What this means is that wherever you see black on your layer mask that's linked to the blue layer reveals the yellow layer underneath. Let's do this together. Make sure you have this file, Layer Masking 101, opened in Photoshop, and that you've turned the Navigator palette off. Okay, so let's select the layer that reads blue paper with cutouts. Now, let's go ahead and apply a layer mask or a stencil to it. That would be this icon down here. So now we have a blank layer mask applied to our blue layer. You can think of this blank layer mask as that blank piece of flexible plastic that we'd like to make the stencil out of. So, of course, in order to do any cutting on the blue layer, we'll need to create the stencil first. So let's first select just the stencil. To do that, hold Alt on your keyboard and just click once the layer mask. When you click the layer mask once, you notice a white outline surrounding the layer mask thumbnail within the Layers palette. And also that your canvas is now white. Again, this is that flexible plastic that has no cuts in it yet. We're going to create a stencil. Okay, so to create this stencil, let's first go ahead and get out some shapes here. Okay, so I'm going to have you get out the rectangle tool first. Now with the rectangle tool selected, remember we want to make areas of our stencil that we'd like to basically cut out to create the stencil. So to do that, of course, we'll need to work with black as our foreground color. To work with black as your foreground color, it's simple. All you have to do is press the D key on your keyboard for the default colors, and then the X key to exchange the default colors. So let's, at this time, just focus in on making the stencil, or the layer mask. So with black as our foreground color, and the rectangle tool selected down here, we want to make sure that Fill Pixels is checked. This will give us nice crisp lines as we make our shapes without having to worry about anything else. Also, make sure that the rectangle shape here is selected, the mode is set to normal, and the opacity is set to 100%, and that anti-alias is checked. Now let's go ahead and make just a couple of rectangles. Okay, and now let's see, what else would I like to add to my layer mask? I'm going to get out a different tool. I'm going to get out the polygon tool. And I think I'm going to choose a custom setting within the polygon tool. So again, make sure that Fill Pixels is selected. And I'm going to go and choose this drop-down menu right here and make sure Star is selected. And now what I'm going to do is just create simple star by click holding and dragging. For purposes of this lesson, let's make sure that our shapes don't overlap. Great. Now I'm going to get out another shapes tool here, the custom shape tool. And again, make sure Fill Pixels is selected. But here, from this drop-down menu, the shape drop-down menu, I'm going to select one of these custom shapes. Let's see. Which one would I like? Maybe this paw print here. Okay, I'm going to make a paw print here and one here. So you didn't have to use the same shapes I did. The only thing you'll need to make sure is that Fill Pixels is selected and that black is set to your foreground color. Okay, so now we've created our stencil. Basically, the black areas again are the cutouts of our stencil, and the white area happens to be that flexible plastic where we can't cut through. So this allows us to make precise cuts to a layer itself. But these cuts are non-destructive, and we'll talk about that in a second.